Hello everyone, welcome to episode number 1 of Myth vs. Craft. I'm setting out to interview interesting people who are really good at what they do. I'm thrilled that our first guest is the very talented Ian Moore. He epitomizes the type of guest that I aspire to have on each episode of this podcast. He's eloquent, introspective, generous in sharing how he approaches his craft, and a flat-out nice guy. Ian first made a name for himself in the early 90s as a guitar player out of Austin, Texas. He earned a spot on Joe Ely's band and went on to front one of the most popular bands in the post-Stevie Ray Vaughan blues rock scene. As he began to find his own voice as a musician, his songwriting evolved, and he began to cover new musical ground. He's been perfecting his craft for over 20 years, and I feel fortunate to have had a chance to pick his brain. I spoke with Ian shortly after he finished the second of 2 songwriters workshops that he ran in Driftwood, Texas, just outside of Austin. We kicked off our conversation with his thoughts on the workshops. How did the songwriting seminars go?
They were phenomenal. I feel a little bit irresponsible saying that because I think people just assume that, of course, well, what would you say otherwise? But just to be really frank, they quadrupled my expectations. I mean, it was way, way, way beyond. And hearing people's responses, we did kind of an exit poll of everybody just to really try to get, figure out, it was our first year to do it, figure out what we could do moving forward. The crowd was amazing. I think this first group of people, because it isn't an established thing, and they were maybe searching more than maybe, I don't know. I don't know what created the dynamic. I think we put not only a lot of energy into the curriculum, but I've really been focused on the minutia of communication, and that when you are talking to somebody, your intention and kind of really what you are focusing on, what you really want to communicate is really important. And we spent a lot of energy early on when we first got everybody together trying to create a space, knowing that if we could do that, we would be infinitely more successful, because it was really requiring everybody to be really open and comfortable. And you get a bunch of musicians together, there's all kinds of insecurities and egos and, just different energies. And we had to find a consensus within a very quick period of time with 15 people, a relatively large group,
Is this the first time you've done something like this, other than one-on-one lessons?
I've done things like this. I have done a workshop before, but I housed it during the afternoon, and it was through an arts organization, and I spent some time work. It wasn't that I didn't work on it, but the level of really curriculum development and intention, and also just the help I had. I mean, I had 2 brilliant guitar instructors with me that were focused. I'm a pretty studied musician, but I really focused my energy on deeper things than technique, really, to be honest. And I mean, that are different things, just more less technical, more emotional. I'm really about how to find ways to play something that matters on an emotional level. But at the same time, when you're analyzing song structures, to have actually a really thorough, analysis of harmonic movement, those types of things that's really important. And some people need it more than others. Some people really need the technical direction because that's the way their brains and souls work. And other people are the exact opposite, couldn't care less. So that was there. We had a brilliant, kind of yoga, qigong instructor, who was also a really pretty girl. I mean, not to minimize her. It was mostly guys. And, a lot of these people had never done any of this stuff. And, it's hard to talk about anything about learning or communal stuff without really analyzing what's happening in the world. And the thing I think that we all realized is that every single person is stressed out, everybody, and we're overwhelmed, and we're just all so stuck in this mindset because we're living in it right now, and we're just, adjusting to the speed of communication with the internet and the amount of responsibility that we have. And you get these people together and they meditate for a little while and, have a really great meal and sit around with a group of people they haven't known and have this community. And all of a sudden you start to find your true nature as a human being. So it's way deeper than songwriting. I think it's really, we just got a cool little peek on what's kind of really necessary for all of us to be doing, and it just happened to come through the onus of a songwriting camp.
That's fantastic, and it seems like and I'm sure it was by design, but the venue, the structure, just the overall context, and the way you structured this and put this together were all key ingredients, perhaps, to make it come together like it did.
Well, a lot of the credit goes to Jody. I mean, honestly, like, she's become a really good friend of mine, and I feel like our friendship has developed because we share a lot of the same value systems, and many of which I just said. Slowing down, the communion at the table, how important meals are these days, and really any ritual at all. And so, yeah, she really helped to design the space, both physical and emotional, so people could do that. And the language I'm using is it's not new to me, but I've always been really reticent to go into areas that sound too metaphysical because I'm a pretty meat and potatoes person. I'm not. I don't like to get too into it, but I'm just realizing, there's an inequity happening right now. And so all the stuff that like Jody is thinking about was really helpful. If it had just been me, I would have had a bunch of people sitting in a room, with guitars and that would have been great. And that's kind of what most songwriting camps that we studied are. You just sit around kind of in a big song circle and play and talk about songwriting,
Understood. I just to give you some backdrop or context, I've been familiar with your music for a while. I've lived in Austin since '95. I moved here to go to school, and I saw you perform. Where was this? I think it was at the Cactus at the Union when you were putting on an acoustic show. And have been familiar with your music and familiar with you for a while, and I kind of rediscovered. Or I guess the impetus for this was that I read a handful of articles that you wrote for Premier Guitar. I want to say it was around 2011, and they really intrigued me, and I really enjoyed them, and that's what made me think that it would be really, I would find it fascinating to pick your brain and learn more about your process, and to do so, I wanted to maybe get a little bit of background in terms of. Just your motivation. Do you recall at what age you first started thinking about making music your career?
Well, I'd take a few steps back and say that a lot of times first of all, I started playing the violin when I was really young, and I think both of my parents have passed, so unfortunately I'm not able to continue to talk to them about that. But I think a lot of I was really, really into music from a young age, and even though neither one of my parents were necessarily musicians by trade, they were both very, very music was part of our life, and it was a really important thing for both of them. And so I think that was brought into my psyche at a young age, and then I started playing the violin, and we had an amazing program in Austin called the String Project, which worked in tandem with the University of Texas classical music program. So we had access to these just brilliant young minds teaching us, and it was a very accelerated program. So I learned quite a bit about music and got really into it to the point that I was going to be probably I was on the track to be a symphony player for sure. I was a very competitive violinist, typically first chair, and I was thinking that was really what I was going to do. And I mean, that was at like 10, 11, really young. And I had a freak accident when I was 14, and all of my tendons in my left hand were cut, and I wasn't able to, they had to be reattached surgically. And I wasn't able to play at all for basically about a year. And so when I came out of that, I picked up the guitar, which was something I'd always wanted to play anyhow, and I started playing then. So things happened really quick from then on. And to be honest, there was never really a moment where I actually decided I wanted to be a professional musician. I think it decided for me. And I guess that moment would have been when I was going to the University of Texas, and I was planned to, and I was completely immersed in going that route and really digging it. And had a tour offered to me for my band, a national tour. I went to talk to my counselor, thinking she was probably going to tell me not to do it. And she was like, you have to do this. Mm-hmm. And so I went out on tour, and I told her I would come back when I was done. And that was 27 years ago.
Did you find that, was that a tough decision to make, or was it a slam dunk once you got that confirmation or encouragement from your counselor?
I'm my dad brought me up kind of in the school of, Joseph Campbell rather. And he was kind of that way of thinking that, decisions are typically, not that all decisions are easy. I've had some hard ones lately, but it was pretty easy. Maybe I should think more about the future. I have a certain way of thinking, and I'm probably different from some other people that are more planners than I am, but I really believe in the guiding yourself by your intuition. And, if you have an opportunity to tour, and you're a young man, something that probably will not come around again. And I would probably, whether it be my own children or I was mentoring somebody. And I just think that, when you take an opportunity like that and you really, really want it, it's something that's interesting to you, you should probably follow it most of the time.
I believe your major was musicology at UT Austin.
Yeah, I was in school for such a short period of time. I was actually pre-law going in because I was really into debate, and as you can probably tell from talking to me, I'm pretty idealistic. So I had this perception that law was quite a bit different than it actually is, and so that I drifted away from that quickly, and just found myself, kind of drifting really towards music. Performance, and musicology was kind of the direction that I was sitting about the time when I went on tour. But I was kind of trying to figure out whether I was going to try to actually apply for a music program. I was flirting with the idea of trying to be the next Peter Guralnick. I really, really loved, I'd grown up. I was a record collector as a kid. I had really deep knowledge of, American soul and blues music and folk music, and I loved reading about it. And so, I kind of had this moment where I, thought that I would, write about all these people I'd grown up with. And I think that was, my last gasp of being part of the university world. So I guess you could say I was a musicology major.
You mentioned a few moments ago that you don't tend to think much about the future, or perhaps you have a special way of thinking about it. When you decided to go on tour, did you have a clear sense of where that would lead you, or the type of career you wanted, or it was an opportunity in front of you, it was appealing, you took it, and you just went with it?
Well, like I said, I feel like, it's been a long time ago, so it's hard to reflect exactly the way I was thinking, but I don't really remember thinking a lot about it other than like, wow, this is going to be a great adventure. And, as I said, the Joseph Campbell, the follow your bliss thing is a very, very deep statement that can come off as pithy if you don't really think it through. But I find it to be a pretty great way of living, and if you're really passionate about something and you're excited about something and you think it through a bit with your kind of critical mind, I tend to be on the liberal side of that decision-making process. So I didn't really probably think a ton, I just don't want to come across like I'm flippant in my life. I'm not at all. I'm very, very trusting more in the process of resonance and what's put in front of you. In other words, that the decisions are often much more imbued with purpose when you just follow what's the right path. Right now I live on an island. I'm really, really interested in the tides because the tides are so powerful. And, I just think about times in my life when I've worked so hard, for instance, to, get a sound across or try to get my career to break on another level. And I put everything I have into it, and I try so hard and I contact everybody, and I work my ass off and nothing happens. And then I have other times where, I barely do anything and everything just opens up and things are so easy. And, yeah, I've really come, and I've kind of always thought that, but even as I've gotten older now, I'm really seeing it. It's true. And, it really is like the tides, when the tide's high, the ships sail easily. When the tide's low, it's a bitch to launch, it's just really, everything's harder. And, so yeah, I just kind of I've always done that, I guess.
That's interesting. Moving over to songwriting for a moment, when you started playing guitar, did you start writing songs right away, or did you follow more of, did you learn covers? Did you learn songs? Did you learn other people's music and eventually grow into writing your own songs?
Um, we, yeah, I mean, it definitely took. Well, I started out as an instrumentalist, and this was one of the interesting dynamics about this workshop is a lot of the people that came, because I do have a lot of what has gotten me recognition is guitar playing, and I'm not as known as a songwriter, even though that tends to be more my focus, I think. So I started out the same way. I was definitely really just into the guitar and just I still am. I mean, I just love I love the fact that there's this thing, and it's not. I mean, a violin is an amazing thing, and all the instruments are amazing, but a guitar, and especially the modern version of it, it's a pretty new thing, and it's kind of open-ended. And so for quite a while, I was just obsessed with just making it make sound, vibrating it, different vibratos. And I studied a lot of, blues players, and I would sit there for days and days just trying to get the wiggle of an Otis Rush vibrato. So very, very, micro studying, not like this big scale, like major and minor scales, just little teeny weird things that probably nobody would notice. And, I think it was when I started playing with Joe Ely that, I was really lucky there. Again, you'd say fate or whatever, but I, played with Joe and, going with Joe and just kind of being open to that experience. All of a sudden I'm around, pretty much the best songwriters in the world, or definitely some of them. And, when you're hanging out with Jimmy Dale and Butch Hancock and Lucinda Williams and Steve Earle and Robert Earl Keen and Townes and Guy Clark, you're going to find an appreciation for the song. There's no getting around it. So I've been telling the story lately before I played Blue Sky, because I consider that to be the first time that I crossed that line of kind of what I was doing live and actually was able to put an emotional context in the song. And I think Blue Sky was the first song that I ever played in front of those people. Like, I was actually proud of that song. I felt like I had something I could justify in my voice to play, because a lot of the other stuff I'd written before that, I just copied people, and it would just be me putting on a costume, and acting a certain way, which, just felt kind of inauthentic. And I when you're playing in front of that level of songwriters, they see right through it. And they're so really, really was not probably for, a few years that I really started to really concentrate on songwriting. And it definitely, my love of songwriting cast my career on a very different path and opened up a lot of new doors, also created a lot of challenges for me as well,
Did you, when did you start singing?
Well, I've always sang. I mean, again, it just took, singing is, I love the voice, and I love recording singers. I feel like it's an area that recording where I feel real confident, because it's so psychological. It's also very technical to be able to express different emotions, physiologically and emotionally, and connecting those two. So I've been singing for a long time, and I just was not considered a very good singer, when I was young, because I didn't really know how to do it. And I think I would kind of try too hard. And when you push your vocal cords too hard, they kind of shut down. So singing's kind of like, it's like you have to find this ease and this very physiologically mellow space to allow this intense force to come out. And if you really, I don't know if you've ever experienced this. I don't know if you're a singer or you like to sing, but sometimes people sing and they just clench their throat up, and then the note gets stuck, and it's like you can't get up to it. So that's one very kind of, obvious way that manifests. But, it just takes training your body and your mind, and I think everybody can be a great singer. I really believe that. And I think that people, you just have to find your voice. And so for me, it took some time. I was such a fan of great singers. I grew up, with some of the, again, trying to emulate Aaron Neville and Marvin Gaye and Al Green and Bobby Blue Bland and all these singers that are just Stevie Wonder, Sam Cooke,
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know. I mean, I'm still not where I want to be, but I'm definitely a much better singer than I was. And I think, now people think I'm a good singer, and definitely didn't when I was young.
Got it. After your first two records with Capricorn, is that around the time that you moved to Washington State?
No, it was a few years later.
And the
Yeah.
reason I ask is that I'm trying to piece together the steps you took to switch direction, to evolve, to expand your songwriting palette. And just from reading bios, it seemed like perhaps the move to Washington State might have or might not have been related to that. But what specific steps did you take, if any, to do that with your songwriting after those first two records?
Well, I was changing before the first record. I was
Okay.
changing between the first and second. I mean, significant changes. I would say the biggest change I probably ever had in my career, like an ever a quantifiable change, was between my first and second records.
Mm-hmm.
And I was raised by a Buddhist professor, and I was also raised in a culture in Austin that valued cultural evolution and change, and really, really surrounded by people that were very aggressive intellectually. And so for me, the very nature of making art was to evolve and change. And so I've kind of done that my whole career. And then obviously having a public career, I know what it was like for me, but then I understand that looking from the outside, everybody sees these big shifts and things that aren't really necessarily the way it happened. I mean, what it was for me is I'm always looking for like a liberation. I'm always looking for the space to just be myself and to kind of explore that path. And like I said, I'm really idealistic, and I'm always convinced that if I'm just really honest with myself and I work hard, that people are going to love it. And that doesn't always work, actually. Because everybody has their own trip, and they receive stuff that I put out. And so I think I kept trying, to kind of like get deeper in my own communication, go on my own path, and at the same time find ways to communicate with people that were going to work. When I was really, really young, when I made my second record, I was really naive about how people took stuff in. And, as I've grown older, I've learned that, just because your intention is pure and you have a really, really, good headspace doesn't mean that's going to translate to the people listen to it on the back end. So, I think, the move was partially that. I mean, the other thing that I always say is that, my life is not defined by my career. I mean, I've got 2 children and a wife now, and even beyond that. I mean, it's like, I have a love of the wilderness and the mountains and the ocean. And, there was part of wanting, the move was partially for that feeling, although I feel like that even imbues my career. I just wanted to be, I think the biggest thing in relation to what we're talking about that I could communicate about that move is that I felt that I was a made man in Austin, and I felt like I needed to challenge myself and see who I could be outside of the love of Austin.
Mm-hmm.
If I moved up here and I stripped away, because my band was one of the main faces of Austin, Texas for years. I mean, everywhere we went, we were the big young up and coming band, and we'd fly into the airport and we knew everybody at the airport, and there was so much energy there, and just people would move to Austin that we met on the road. And I just felt like everything about me was defined by Austin, Texas.
Mm-hmm.
And as you know, it's such a powerful entity. It has such a, you ask anybody that knows anything about, America and pop culture, anything, and you say Austin, they're going to say something about it,
Definitely. When you mentioned all these other interests that you have, and that your life understandably isn't defined by your career, if If music were no longer a viable option, and you can answer this question either thinking of moving forward or going back 10, 20 years, if music had not been a viable option, is there anything, what other occupations do you think you might have been interested in exploring?
Oh man, I would. I mean, there's a, I kind of explore them anyhow. I mean, oh boy. Well, one thing that is kind of funny whenever I say it, I think it kind of gives people a kick, is city planning.
Hmm.
I'm really, really interested in sociology. I think, my father being an ethnographer and my mom being a social worker, I'm obsessed with cultural trends. And I think one of the, my dad, an ethnographer, is basically you study the cultural manifestation of sociological changes. So the things that people make because of the lifestyles they live, and that's kind of what I kind of study, I guess, about music. Like, I'm really into music and I'm really into food, and I'd like to be able to be involved, and I'm kind of trying to do that anyhow, anecdotally in my life, in the flow of cities. Like, I really feel, for instance, I'm in Austin all the time, and and I love Austin. It's really my home, even though I've lived here for a long time. And you can really see some seriously poor decision making. I mean, I'm not saying I could do it any better, and I'm not trying to. I'm just saying it from if we're having a philosophical discussion about city planning, I would say that Austin's in a very dangerous space right now. I would say that there was an enormous investment kind of in the cultural infrastructure of Austin that allowed this huge business real estate boom to happen, and people have been cashing in for a long time. But what's happening is, in tandem with all these other cities like Seattle and San Francisco, they're not continuing to enrich the core that they built up to get this cash in. And that's a big deal because, the city's health is really dependent upon continuing to nourish that, because the moment that you lose that thing and the property values, the bottom line goes down, you got a big new group of people living in the town that are not tied into it the way the culture was before the boom. So I'm fascinated with that. I love food. A lot of my friends are very involved in, similar things to music, but with food. I have a friend that does these amazing dinners, dinner over death over dinner, drugs over dinner, where he flies all over the world and sits down around a table and deals with controversial, emotional issues, with the idea that the communion of a table brings out a deeper and more, a less aggravated response, and that you can actually work through big problems. So I'd like to do something like that,
Yeah, definitely. I don't know if you saw Dave Grohl's Sound City series of I guess mini series on HBO, but there was an episode dedicated to Austin, and
Yep.
he pretty much echoed the at the end of the show your assessment of where Austin was, what enabled it to become what it became, and where it is now, and pretty much echoed his assessment being that it's in a dangerous place right now.
Yeah. No, I didn't. It's funny. Dave Grohl is like one of those guys. Like, he's like the Johnny Depp of music. It's like he's so nice, and obviously, I mean, I don't know him personally, but I know Taylor, his drummer, real well, and I've heard nothing but great things. I honestly, when he did that show, I was so jealous of him, because I was like, I should have done that show. I mean, I don't mean it in a bitter way, but more like I was just like, man, God, this, because that's totally like, for years and years and years. I mean, I'm not saying I'm the only musician, but that's something I've really cataloged, was really and that's how I look at touring and music and stuff, was the thread of these common cities and the heartbeat of what's going on in each city. And I really felt keyed into that, But I mean, David, he's the right guy to do it. And I think he's a smart guy,
Yeah, definitely. I enjoyed it quite a bit. I wanted to ask you, how do you currently split your time between songwriting, recording, and performing?
Well, it's kind of like having 3 kids, and they're all precocious, and they're all constantly being let down by your lack of attention to them. So, for instance, before you called, I've just kind of gone back from the songwriting camp and realized I need to practice my guitar. This is getting ridiculous, and when I do that, obviously I'm not writing as often. they just come in waves, and it's a constant reassessment of need, you know. You can't be all of those things all of the time. Something gives, and there's a reason that there's nobody that kind of does that all. Like, there's always a strength. I mean, no matter how good people are, there'll be this dude, like, you look at Prince and you're kind of like, yeah, he doesn't really write songs or vehicles for his, I'm not trying to say, he's a brilliant songwriter. I'm not trying to say, but if you put that in line with his musical ability, and you know what I mean, there's always a trade-off. And then you'll get like a Ryan Adams who's pretty good with lyrical imagery, and you can tell that's where he really focuses his energy. And then you throw in recording, and it's like, and then the other thing, one of my many rants lately has been like, not only do we have to now do all of these things and largely record ourselves because your profit margins are so low in the back. And, when you release a record now, you really have to do a lot of the work yourself. But we're also now becoming self-marketers, like pretty intense self-marketers. So that's the other job I probably spend more time, honestly, and not to sound pitiful, but I would bet I spend more time right now on social media than I do working on music. And it's not because I like social media.
Do you, if we focus on those three legs to the stool, at least the three that you presumably enjoy, writing, recording, and performing, could you do away with one of them? Meaning, and I'm thinking specifically of John Frusciante, the Red Hot Chili Peppers former guitar player. I'm fascinated by him in a number of ways, and I've read a number of interviews. And lately, he actually, since he left the band for the second time, he's very strongly expressed that he has no interest whatsoever in ever performing live again, and that he pretty much never enjoyed it, and he's much happier focusing on writing and to a certain extent recording, and that he felt like he was being inauthentic when he performed, and it was the same songs, and he was that it was just fake, and he never enjoyed it. He couldn't connect with audiences, and to me, it was surprising in that I always felt like at least in my limited experience, that performing was, and it's perhaps because it was limited experience, was a rush.
Well, I don't agree with John Frusciante, but I'm not him. I think that being a fan of his as well. I haven't followed his career as much lately, but I'm a fan. I know how I respect his desire to follow his personal integrity. I just don't disagree. I don't agree that I think that performance, for me at least, is communion, and on the best nights, it's the greatest thing of all. And recording, it's a thing. Recording is you alone or you with a group of musicians, and it is a thing. It's great. It's amazing, but it's different from a live performance. And for instance, I was a big Neville Brothers fan growing up, and the rub on them for years was that, they were the most amazing live band, but they couldn't make a record because you can't capture that visceral energy of the brothers, these three guy brothers and their friends all playing together. And, I love the studio. I'm really, as a matter of fact, I feel like that's been probably the biggest renaissance in my career, if you follow. And I think where I've lost some people is that a lot of my fans really relate to me on an emotional, especially early fans, on an emotional kind of raw level. And I've really gotten into to recording, and really I'm really proud of like the last couple of records or last three records where I've kind of largely self-produced, of the sonic cloth of the records and what I've done there. And I like them. I actually listen when those songs come on. I actually enjoy them, which is weird to enjoy your own music. It's just a funny dynamic. I just want to clarify. It's like, my early recordings, even though I liked a lot of things, I liked the songs and I liked that, it felt really weird to me for some reason. And I wasn't really people would put my recordings on and I'd be really uncomfortable and I just didn't enjoy. I felt real stressed out when they were on. And now when my records come on, for the most part, the more recent ones, I think because I've learned how to use the studio to communicate what I want to communicate in the studio, like the way I want my vocals to sound, the way I want the instrumentation to sound, the feel of the musical, accompaniment. I have a thing now, so I'm much more happy when I hear it back.
And that could be a whole separate conversation onto itself. And that I'm also fascinated by the craft of recording. And sometimes what I've asked myself is, for example, I'm sure you're familiar with Emmylou Harris's Wrecking Ball album. And
Very familiar, actually.
and I read a book by the producer.
Well, let me just, Tim, before you get too far into this, I was there with Daniel Lanois when he was planning that record out, actually. I was making Modern Day Folklore with Mark Howard, who's Daniel's head engineer. We were working at Daniel's studio, and Daniel was there the whole time we were there for weeks together. And there were, during our pre-production especially, there were many, many nights when I would sit around, and Mark and Daniel and I and maybe another guy in the band would sit around, talk music, and he was collecting the songs for Wrecking Ball, and we would listen to, I remember listening to Orphan Girl, I think, with him the first time he listened to that, when he was trying to figure out if that was going to be one of the tunes. And he had all these different Martins, these different guitars, and he was trying to figure out what accompaniment he was going to do and the players. And so, yeah, I was actually really close to that record. I even sang background vocal that didn't make it on the record, but it was down in New Orleans recording the horns for Modern Day at Kingsway, which is their and that's where they were recording it. And since I was there, and we were recording around their schedule, I sang a background vocal.
Wow. I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall listening to those conversations, because based on reading Daniel's book, it seems like I would venture to guess that the two of you see eye to eye in many ways, and if not, at least can have very spirited conversations discussing your perspectives.
Yeah, I think I don't know if we really didn't see eye to eye. We disagreed about almost everything. But I really like Daniel a lot, and I'm a big fan of his music. No, he's a really interesting guy, and and the other thing that was is I think that when I met Daniel, and I don't mean to speak for him, and I actually have no idea, but this is just I don't think he really respected where I was coming from. I think, he was obviously quite a bit older, and he worked with all these really heavy musicians, and it was a little bit of a crossing time. Like, I kind of got his trip. I don't think he got mine at that point. And, he was really anti-guitar player at that point. He was really, there was this real negativity towards kind of we were all, me and Charlie and Doyle, all coming up in the wake of Stevie Ray Vaughan. And, it was just very uncool in that circle. And I remember that, and and I was kind of going through a thing of feeling like, I didn't want to be lumped in this. And so we had some insecurity and negativity around that too. And so when I met Daniel, it was amazing, and I learned a ton, and we did definitely have some spirited conversations. And, Daniel's just a really interesting guy. I mean, probably the thing I remember is we were listening to records one night, and I put on Sly Stone's Fresh, which is one of my favorite records of all time. And I consider it to be just a masterpiece of funk. It's truly one of the greatest funk records. I think it is the funkiest thing ever recorded. And I think I said as much. Daniel looks at me with this very raised eyebrows and seemingly very condescending, goes, "Oh, the funkiest, right? Really?" And I was kind of saying like as if you can say that, and I was just speaking, kind of as a young man, with the real excitement of, making an emphatic statement. But that was the kind of thing. So it was really cool. But we're very different, that's the beauty of the whole trip, is that, you hit people at different points, and, sometimes you really, really connect, and sometimes the very nature of I think Daniel and I probably have a lot in common, and that's probably why we didn't connect well,
The reason I bring up Wrecking Ball is that in reading his book, I just really got a glimpse into what it was like to make that record, and for that matter, all of the records he's made. And I asked myself, clearly he appreciates the in many cases subtle differences in the results that are yielded by the attention to detail and constant experimentation and all the heart, soul, blood, and tears that he put into making that record and the records he makes. And I'm sure I can imagine that the performers and Emmylou herself appreciated it very much. The question I ask myself sometimes is, do you think the general audience appreciates it to the same level or anywhere near the same level, or are they really reacting to the performance that was enabled by the things that Emmylou and the band and the performers could appreciate themselves?
Well, we're dancing very near a gaping maw culturally with what you're talking about, and I get to areas where it's difficult for me kind of to talk about it because I don't want to come across as being cynical, and I don't want it to be misread as like, throwing. I really believe that it really depends on where you're at with your life. I think anybody can hear that, but I think you have to be. I'm trying to think of how to say this in a way that's like don't sound like an asshole and a dumbass, basically. I think anybody can hear it. I think it requires not filling your life up with completely empty crap, and I think that is part of it. I really do. And I think that there is a real disparity in how people take in content. Some people take in content with a searching soul, and they're looking for a deeper truth, and their hearts and their souls are open. And so when you are like that and you hear a record like that, I think it's hard to not kind of be hit on like a Jungian level, like you just feel the beauty and the detail, and all of those things kind of are this just poignant, really deep art thing that connects you to kind of a deeper space. I think a lot of people use pop culture, music, and TV to basically validate personal ignorance. And so it really depends on where you're coming from with what you want to put inside of you. Yeah, I don't know how to say it. I just sound like an asshole, but
no. That was very clear.
But that's really what I think. That's what I think. So I'll live or die with that statement. I mean, so yeah, I think that really, honestly, if you're open to it, and not that everyone's going to like that record. I mean, the other side of music is that we all need different things. Some people really, really love Brian Eno. Obviously Daniel's partner on a lot of stuff because of the wallpaper nature of his music, and some people really, have souls that have a difficulty with the darkness of even a, Wrecking Ball maybe is too dark for him. There's so many, music is so beautiful on that level that I do feel like if you are of the type that could take this in and you are quiet enough, it becomes, that statement is, I feel like it is received by anybody the same way. That can hear it and can open up to it.
So that's a great answer. And in recording your own music and thinking and feeling the way you do you find difficulty drawing a line beyond which there are diminishing returns in terms of, let me think of a silly example, trying out 14 different microphones for a singer to capture just the right timbre and vibe and just really match that singer's voice. Do you ever struggle to find a point at which something is good enough?
I'm kind of the opposite of that, actually. I can find beauty in pretty much almost any recording technique. The only time I don't like it is if it's too sterile. Mm-hmm. The only time I get lost is like if the thing's got a vibe, and I think this, Daniel would probably say the same thing. I mean, it's more that when you're, I think if you're referring to something he's talking about, because it's when you're close to something, but you're not quite there. And I've done that some. I work really fast. I know my gear that I have. One of the things that Brian Eno is famous for, and as a matter of fact, one of the things we used in our songwriting workshop is his strategies, the oblique strategies. And one of the main strategies, I don't know if you're familiar with that, but that's a series of statements that are meant to free up you from your literal constrained minds in case you're stuck. People use them in studios a lot. But one of the things is, simplify, take things away. So if you've got 18 microphones that you're going to try in a singer, you have too many microphones. Mm-hmm. There's no way you can quantitate. Well, first of all, I have a friend, Eric Valentine, that did a AES speech. I did a keynote, the American Engineer Society, a couple of years back, and he was right after me. And his thing was that our oral memory, that from our ears, the memory of our ears is very, very short. And that is actually something that people might say that's different, but he proved that this is a scientific study that was proven. So your memory of being able to actually memorize beyond rough areas of sound and so forth is very, very poor. So if you're listening to 18 microphones in a row, by the time you get to about 4, you've lost what one sounds like, and you're really just running around in circles at that point.
Definitely. And I actually had a section of my questions that I didn't think we would get to, and we probably won't, that had to do with precisely that, and really more so dealing with the objectivity or perceived objectivity of comparing equipment, sounds, and how I've read a little too, and learn more about not only do we have a short memory and are we unable to really remember what something even that we played a few seconds ago actually sounds like, but how it's so deeply affected by our preconceived notions. If one is a very expensive condenser, a Telefunken mic, you expect it to sound a certain way, and your brain will actually trick you into hearing things that perhaps aren't really there. And not just that, but in terms of acoustics too, and especially if it's not in a really well-treated space, how moving even your head, a few inches or a few feet in a different direction, or moving a cabinet, a few inches closer to the wall or away from the wall, that there's basically so many variables at play that it's very, very difficult to actually make truly objective comparisons.
Well, so to break this down, we have way too many choices. And I was saying that kind of before with the kind of talking about information. We have too much information. We have too many choices at every single step of the way, and they're paralyzing. So what we all end up doing is wasting most of our time with choices. And so, if you study great recordings, and, these people now, if you're into recording, you'll get on the forums and they'll be like, what microphone for this thing? What preamp? And it's like, look, talk to George Martin and his engineers when they were recording the Beatles. They really only had a few options. And so part of the beauty of the recordings is that they weren't spending their time, obsessing about the tools. Mm-hmm. They were getting a tool that they knew worked, and they were moving forward with it. And then maybe upon reflection, they would change it the next time. But you just can't get so strung out on the process, or you never get to the end. I mean, the end is really getting a performance down on tape. And I mean, again, Daniel's what he was famous for was always rolling tape, mm-hmm. regardless of whether the sounds were right. And saying that, the engineer sitting here, and I can't tell you how many times I've done this, where I'm going in to do a vocal take, which should be very emotional and fresh and present. And then I spend 45 minutes to an hour in this weird, very sterile vocal booth while the engineer tries out preamp after preamp. And then by the time I start singing, I'm like completely esoterically out of my head, and I'm not there. And so they capture these kind of mediocre sounds very well,
That's a great way to put it. What you just mentioned about having too many options reminds me of a book that you may be familiar with. It's called The Paradox of Choice. And basically talks about why more is less, and how having just the right number of options is great, but having any more than that is, like you said, paralyzing.
Well, I think, you can really look, I've been really getting into, I'm one of the many things that I love to talk about stuff I barely know about. So I constantly sound like a borderline asshole, and you have to forgive that. But I will excuse that in saying that I'm ambitious in trying to understand things that I don't understand. I call her my aunt. My uncle and she have broken up, but my aunt Sandy is a neuroscience writer, as my cousin is a neuroscientist as well. And she writes a lot about the evolution of the human brain to understand new tools. So I've been talking about this a lot, and I talked about it a lot again at my workshop, because I was trying to, communicate why it's important to simplify and why it's important to get quiet. And all those things to me are based on the fact that our brain simply is not organized to take in this level of information and choices. We just don't have the ability. And just on a basic neuroscience level, the technology, there's a theory that has a name, which of course I don't know, and it is that technology increases at an exponential level, and brain development and the evolution of the brain and continued tweaking of the way we use the brain, and especially in relation to our use of tools, occurs at there's an actual ratio, and I forget what it is, but it's under 2 to 1 because there's the deviation of every genetic change after birth, right? So we're just plodding along very slow, and technology is going along very, very fast. And really what technology does, at least what it does right now, at least what I'm seeing, is it just provides us with endless options. And here all day today, for instance, just being on the internet, I know what it does to me. It's a very overwhelming thing, and when I think about like your recording, it's really difficult, for instance, to not use your 8,000 plugins. It's really difficult to not want it. There's just too many things all the time. Not to mention that your computer, your studio computer, is also a thing that connects to the internet. So, you have to check your email, and you're recording, and all of a sudden you're checking your email, and then you look up and you've been on Facebook or whatever you're on, or looking up some random news source, and an hour and a half just went by and you weren't recording. I think all of those things play into the dynamic of modern recording right now.
Understood. Bringing it back to songwriting, I wanted to ask you: is there a specific instrument that you prefer to write on? I'm basing this question on reading once that Jimi Hendrix found it difficult to write with a guitar in his hands, and that he tended to write in his head and see colors and hear sounds, and later try to translate it through the instrument as best he could. Is there an instrument that you prefer to write on?
Well, I typically do write on the guitar, and I did do a whole part on that, in synesthesia. And I always wonder about that with Jimi Hendrix. I mean, he was so young, and he was so romantic, and he was also, especially during interviews, was often really high. So I really wonder if that's really the way. I mean, that would be amazing if he really did that. And I've had moments where I have felt like that, and I've had these, when I kind of these things that translate. I'm a huge Jimi Hendrix fan, of course, and for me, it's not quite that magical. I feel like I have a relatively magical process, but it's really, I have a guitar, and lately some on piano. I've been trying to write more on piano because it's a very, very different way to write. And sometimes just writing without an instrument in my head, I guess, but more kind of visualizing the chords or maybe what the melody is and not worrying about the chords, My typical process, though, is much more kind of workmanship with the guitar in my hands and coming up with a melody and trying to, wrap lyrics around it. And we did a lot of work on that stuff in the workshop. There's different ways to get there.
Has that process, I imagine it has changed over time. If you look back, 20 years and how you used to write songs and compare it to how you do it today, has it changed substantially?
Yeah, again, I mean, I feel like we are always changing all the time. And, there is no way to revisit the self of you from a time, 20, 25 years ago. And yes, I'm completely different. The things that turn me on when I'm writing, and so consequently the way I write, like I said before, I mean, when you're really young, you typically are emulating things pretty directly because you just don't. It's hard to have your own voice. I think that's real common. Just the way our brains work. We learn by copying things typically, and I feel like now when I write, most of the time I really have. Even when I try to copy something, I can't really do it anymore. I just I've kind of evolved into my own way of doing things. So it's changed. My writing style's changed a lot with that.
I don't know if anyone at your songwriting seminar perhaps shared this frustration, but I think to many aspiring songwriters, it probably is frustrating to read an interview with a musician they like, and just hear that a song came to them. And I think I remember reading something. It might have been a Tom Petty interview where he just kind of I'm paraphrasing what he said, but he kind of referred to the songwriting process as something that just kind of happened, and it was an at bat, meaning the trying to write was an at bat, and sometimes it happened and sometimes it didn't, and when it did, it was as if he was just channeling something, and as fascinating as that can be to read to someone who is trying to become a better songwriter, that can awfully be discouraging.
Yeah, well, I think he's right though, and I think that if you actually follow the process, what I find, and this was what a lot of people even mention in the song, is I think people are a lot lazier than they want to admit. It's really easy to just kind of go, "Oh, this is hard, I give up," and you really didn't ever put in the effort. And I think what happens if you think about Tom Petty, I mean, how many songs has he written? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And how many years before he started writing songs was he just? See, the thing is that we all go through life and we see different things. And an architect always sees the angles of trees and mountains and things. A painter sees maybe colors and forms and shapes. A musician hears order amongst chaos. We all, depending on our discipline, are taking this just multitude of sounds and sights and feelings and things and processing them for what we need. So when you're a songwriter, and this is exactly what I talked about in the workshop. Because what I think the way, if you ever want to be to the point where songs come to you, because they come to me, I have that happen, not all the time, but somewhat often, is you fill yourself with content. You take and, you read interesting books, you watch interesting programs, you really treat your mind and your brain kind of like a temple, knowing that whatever information is going to sit there and either, fill you up with interesting ideas or just kind of muddle you up with a bunch of random crap. And I think that that's what every artist do, but, definitely just focusing on songwriters, is you do that and then you write a lot of songs to where you start to have these natural things that happen, and you write a lot of lyrics and you get really, adept with your own imagery. Tom Petty definitely has his and everyone has theirs. And then the songs do come out, because then once you get that, you just get out of your way and you just kind of try to stay calm and relaxed and don't fight it. And we did so many exercises at the workshop where I think people were surprised. One of them, which my wife came up with, this is a really, really great exercise. It's a descriptive exercise where you pass an ice cube around in a circle. Here's a funny dynamic about this. We did it 2 times, the beginner workshop and the advanced workshop. The beginners were better than the advanced. And the reason they were better is because they were more, as a group, were more okay with not being good. And so consequently, they were quicker to let this stuff come out unedited, and the unedited response was often really, really good. And that is just classic creativity manifesting, and any creative writer will tell you the same. Like, if you're editing and you're worried about looking dumb before you even get it out, you're just short-selling yourself, because your psyche is more powerful than you know. So those statements about waking up with a song, though they are annoying, they're just kind of shorthanding a bunch of other stuff that they might have said, well, for 40 years, I paid attention to the minutia of songs that nobody else listened to, right?
Right, definitely. And do you think there's value, and I might have read this somewhere, in basically writing a lot of bad songs and being okay with just writing and exercising and thinking of it as exercising and writing 1, 5, 10, 25 bad songs, because that's oftentimes the type of exercise and the type of repetition and the number of iterations required to get to something that you actually truly like?
I totally believe that. And again, and I'm not trying to sell my workshop. I don't even have another one on the books yet, but we did that. And I can't just, I mean, it's so funny. Like, now you're just really aligning with all of my curriculum. And basically what happened was, first of all, define a bad song. I mean, I can tell you how many times, I've written a song that I thought was a bad song that ended up being a great song. And, your perspective and your self-reflection, it's like you can't see yourself when you stare at yourself in a mirror. So how can you tell definitively when you write what is truly a bad song? So what I said to everybody was, don't worry. We had a few, these were very, very detailed steps, but along the way, like we do a thing where it's just, here's the deal. You get 20 minutes and you have to write. Don't worry about punctuation. Don't worry about spelling. Just write. Just let words come out. Just to see that you can do it. And preferably, let them come out in like this torrent. Don't make them ordered. Don't make them, don't have them be neat. Just let them come out. And then take a moment to acknowledge what just came out of your brain when you thought, when I made you do it. This wasn't even a thing. And then, when we started writing the songs, a lot of the people that were there had this exact blockage, and they were saying, I can't write a song. I get really frustrated. So my biggest, thing was just like, well, then write a bad song. Don't worry about it. Mm-hmm. And so they'd start writing their bad song, and the bad song ended up being a good song more often than not. And then sometimes, I guess sometimes it is. I definitely have tons of songs that I'll never use. But yeah, I would definitely say that just getting them out, it gets them out of the way, and maybe something else comes out. Or the other thing that happens, I think, with good songwriters is they're constantly revisiting. They're very playful with the concepts of what a song might be. So they'll take a song and go, look at that bridge, or wow, that's kind of a cool line. I'm gonna use this in another song. So it's not so that's a crappy song. I'm never gonna look at it again. This may be revisited again in a different form.
I have a close friend, personal friend who makes a living as a professional musician, and in discussing songwriting with them, and sharing some of my own personal frustration in terms of having many bits and pieces of songs and bridges and riffs and that were just kind of lying around, and I could never really compile in a way that I found satisfactory. He shared a very methodical and actually very organized way in which he personally handles it, which was that he tends to catalog bits and pieces that he might have come up with. It might be something as quick as an iPhone recording or something on his phone, that then he will then catalog based on key, based on tempo, based on vibe, and then he builds this catalog, and he has these cubby holes where he has these different bits and pieces that when needed he can reach into and see if he finds something that works. Is that something that you've ever tried or you think might be helpful to some people?
Yeah, I think I think everybody has a different process, and like there was a guy at the first weekend of songwriting. It was actually Jody's dad, but he actually took the course, and he's an amateur songwriter. Most of his tunes are kind of pretty simple, just stuff that he really enjoys doing. But boy, his organizational skills were great, and I was like, wow. So that was that. I'm not super organized with the way I do it. I'm pretty much like I do. I keep voice memos on iPhones, and one of the things we did a whole segment on different tools you can use. There are a ton of applications and stuff for organizing your songs, and there actually even stuff for the iPhone where you can organize lyrics and voice memos in one place. And yeah, that's all great. I mean, it just depends, if you're a songwriter every day, which I go through phases where I will be, I don't get to do this every single day, but I'll kind of go through phases where I'm kind of actively writing. And when I do, I try to create a space where I'm really keeping track of all that stuff so that I don't lose anything, and I'm sure I've lost plenty of great ideas over the years, but, I don't get strung out about it. I think that is really helpful. And again, we're all different. We have different brains. I had a guy in my advanced class who was just so cerebral about everything. He just he just had to organize things and put them in boxes, and that's the exact opposite of how I write. But I totally respect that way of thinking. It's just different than the way I do. So he was super organized, and everything had purpose and serious reasoning.
Right. I figure, or I'm guessing that someone who's you specifically, or someone who's been writing songs for such a long time, perhaps sometimes the struggle you face when writing songs isn't just, is this something I like or don't like, but is this something that has been done before, or am I repeating myself? And perhaps seeking to innovate or do something that you haven't done before might be a second constraint that you face when you write songs?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't run into that. First of all, I really don't worry, and that's yet another thing we talked about. I said, listen, and I even illustrated it by going to the point of all the way to showing the actual lawsuit songs of people. I'm just, every now and again I'll have a song where somebody else will go, yeah, that's, somebody will point. But even then, like I have a tune I wrote called Lines of Ballard, and my friend Jeff Salzman, who's my main mix engineer, I sent it to him because I love the song. It's a very Ray Davies style kind of insider look at the demise of the Seattle power pop culture, and so I wrote it very purposefully, kind of quoting the melodic phrase in XTC's Towers of London. Well, Jeff heard it and he was just like, I can't mix this. This is a total ripoff of XTC. And I'm like, no, it's a nod, you know? And I mean, so to me, never bothers me at all. And I am changing so much that I kind of have the opposite problem. I am, you know, could probably stand to do more songs that are like the other tunes that I've done. I move really, really quickly through genre and style. And I've been thinking about that a lot, like, you know, the way someone like Britt from Spoon very methodically and very conservatively works, you know, and you can tell it's his mindset, even though if you were publicly to compare probably his career to mine, most people would be like, well, he's significantly more experimental, but he's not. He's got a cool sound, but it's been a very if you study his records, they're plotting movement from thing to thing to thing. So he moves very slowly around, and it's really interesting. It's almost like a guy who hikes through a canyon really slowly and notices all the details. And so I'm trying to learn from that way of thinking as opposed to being the guy that's just going, you know, from country to country to country, plundering and taking out the shiny bits, you know.
If you were to look ahead at the very next song, if you were to sit down this afternoon and decide you're going to write, is there a set order in which things tend to happen? Is it lyrics first? Is it sit down with a guitar, come up with a chord progression, melody, or maybe some of those parts are interchangeable? But is there a general progression through which your songwriting process will go?
I would say in general, it's me sitting down with kind of an idea, in typically a melody and or chords kind of in tandem, and then lyrics after that. But sometimes I'll have a melody and no chords at all, and then I work the chords around. And what I often try to do in that case is to, you know, I like simple things, but I like simple things with slight quirks. I don't like, you know, I very, very rarely will just write a straight ahead anything just because I get too bored with it. Although I've been trying to even explore that. So I'm, you know, typically, you know, chords and melody.
And when you say that you get bored with straight ahead, a straight ahead song, do you find that by now it comes naturally to you to avoid something that is straight ahead and you immediately take an alternate path, or do you ever find that you need to maybe set rules to force you to do something that's not straight ahead?
A little bit of both. I mean, I definitely, again, I think, you know, just altering the way you do stuff. Like, you know, for instance, I got really into, there was a band called White Denim that came out a few years back, a really great band out of Austin. And one of the things that I really love about them is they're so unpredictable, you know, and they do a lot of time changes, you know, and, you know, so like, for instance, listening to them for a while and then kind of going, you know, just mess with that. I've never really thought about that before. Just really changing, you know, thinking more almost like a prog rock guy and putting in, you know, a bar of 5/4, you know, just try it, you know, just so some of those things are outside rules from the thing. But typically, yeah, I think I naturally I'm always kind of looking for a little quirk and something that inspires me just so I'm staying interested in the process.
Understood. Ian, we have gone a little over an hour, and I don't want to keep you too long. I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversation, and I wanted to ask you that last question. Is there anything else, perhaps from the songwriting seminar, that you feel you'd like to share, or that you felt was really valuable to the folks who attended it?
Yeah, I do actually, and thank you, Marco, for the interview. But like I said, and I probably already touched on this, but I can't be emphatic enough to say that to me, the biggest part of the process and the most important thing is just learning to get quiet. Mm-hmm. And I just feel like, you know, it's always been that way. And really because when you get quiet, you notice details. You're able to slow down and reflect. And so however people do that, I mean, we did some meditation and also just try to set a space to create that. But you know, I just feel like with all the other stuff, I mean, and you know, and then you get the side benefit of like, you got quiet and you actually, it's just really good for the spirit, you know. But I definitely think in the creative process, just getting quiet with yourself and figuring, when you do that, all of a sudden, all these things all these details that we're talking about, kind of fade away a little bit, and you're able to actually create more easily. I'm not trying to be, make it out as if it's this, easy thing, but I think getting quiet is paramount.
Yeah, and beneficial to so much more than creativity and songwriting.
Amen. It is indeed.
Ian, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. I will be following up with you soon.
Great. Thank you, Marco.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.
Thank you for listening to this inaugural episode of Myth vs. Craft. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Ian as much as I did. Until next time.